Today, these two titans will battle out to be crowned the king of running super shoes. Yes, the Nike Alphafly Next % will be taking on the Adidas Adios Pro 2s. Welcome back to the channel, I'm Josh and here we talk all things triathlon and running, whether those be vlogs, training tip videos or shoe reviews just like today. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, please consider hitting that subscribe button as it really helps out the channel. So yes, we are comparing what are considered two of the best running shoes on the market right now. The real kind of flagship products from their respective companies. In my left hand we have the Nike Alphafly Next %, the record-breaking shoe when it comes to marathons. In my other hand we have the Adidas Adios Pro 2s, another record-breaking shoe when that comes to the 10K distance. Both of these are favoured by athletes across the board when compared to other shoes, but which one is better? That's a very difficult question to answer because these are two of the best shoes on the market, but we're going to be breaking down the upper, the midsole and the outsole of these shoes to compare and see exactly which you might prefer. With enough said, let's dive straight into the video. Let's go through some basic and general facts of these shoes before we dive into the full review. Starting with the Nike Alphafly, this in my men's size 9 is 210 grams, exactly the same as the Adios Pro 2s. The Alphafly has 39mm of foam in the heel and 35 in the forefoot, giving us a rather modest 4mm drop. On the other hand, the Adios Pro 2s are also 210 grams in my UK men's size 9. However, we have 39mm of foam in the heel here, but we only have 29mm in the forefoot, giving us a 10mm drop compared to the Alphafly's 4mm drop. And that's a surprisingly noticeable difference between the shoes. So let's talk about the uppers of these running shoes. Starting with the Alphafly, in this shoe we have got the upgraded fly knit, we have got the Alpha knit. This is quite a thick and coarse knit with a lot of large holes in it for your air breathability. This is definitely one of my favourite uppers, and it actually is slightly better than some of the other fly knit shoes that I've tried. And that upper is very different from the one on the Adios Pro 2s. Here we have a real kind of plasticky material. It's much thinner, I would say, than that. However, it's not as breathable. It's more of a single piece of plastic with some of these blue reinforced pieces compared to the knit, which is pretty much the same throughout the whole shoe. Comparing the fit of these two shoes is quite difficult to do. Both of them fit excellently in my opinion. I went true to size in my men's UK size 9 in both, and I'm really pleased that I did. There's a great amount of space in both of these shoes, and I wouldn't have gone a half size down or a half size up. I'm really pleased. I think the atom knit material in the Alphafly is slightly more fitted, slightly more molding to my foot, so I might find the upper of this shoe a little bit more comfortable as it comes to fit. However, the Adidas's are really close. They are also incredibly comfortable, so I think at this point it's just personal preference. On to lockdown now, and I really think those Alphaflys might come out a little bit further ahead than the Adios Pro 2s. I really like the tongue design in this shoe when compared to the Adidas's. The fact that it's all one piece with just a slight amount of padding really helps to kind of pour all of the material down on your foot rather than just yanking a tongue down. It really kind of wraps around the midfoot of your foot. However, that might be more due to the heel collars, where I think the Alphafly really takes the cake. Like in my Alphafly initial review, I said I really like the heel collar of this shoe, and that hasn't changed. It does look a little bit weird with just a single band of padding in the heel and basically nothing else, but it works so well. I think that adds to some of the lightness of this shoe while also giving it incredible lockdown. I think that heel collar definitely helps the lockdown of this shoe. When we compare that heel collar to the one in the Adidas's, it's just not quite as good here. There's a little bit more padding, however, it's on either side rather than directly on the Achilles, and that might work better for some people. If you often find shoes kind of press on the back of your foot on that Achilles, then this one might be better for you, but I've never had that problem, and so I wouldn't call it a real heel slippage, but I'm not always as confident in the rear foot of this shoe when compared to the Alphaflys. So when we compare the uppers of these two shoes, I really think the Alphafly takes the cake, but only by a tiny bit. So that's one win for the Alphafly. Onto the midsoles of these running shoe behemoths. In the Alphafly, we've got a whole heck load of Zoom X foam. We've got 39mm in the rear and 35mm in the forefoot. And I know it doesn't look like that, but this blue here is actually still foam, so it is even more than it quite looks. It's not just kind of the white throughout the midsole. To accompany that Zoom X foam, we have two AirPods in the forefoot of this shoe and a full length carbon fiber plate running through the midsole right above those Zoom Air units. In the Adidas, we also have their top end foam, the Lightstrike Pro foam. However, we don't have any AirPods, nothing like that. It's just foam throughout with some of those metatarsal rods, which we can see even more clearly than on the carbon plate. For the Nike, these are carbon rods that are supposed to follow the bones in your feet to make it more natural feeling than the Alphafly. Starting with the comfort of these two shoes, and I do think it's incredibly similar when it comes to that midsole comfort. Both are really soft foams that are nugs and bouncy underfoot, especially as you start to pick up the pace. However, I do think the Alphafly's foam might be slightly more bouncy than the Adios Pro 2s. And I think that might also be impacted by having a little bit more foam in the forefoot of this shoe, as this shoe has a slightly more aggressive drop. When it comes to those carbon plates or carbon energy rods, I think they're both really stiff compared to some of the other competitors on the market. I've run in both the New Balance Fuel Cell RC Elite version 2 and the Saucony Endorphin Pro 2s, and I can say that these shoes are definitely stiffer than both of those in those carbon plates. However, I do think the energy rods might be slightly stiffer. I don't know if that's better. Maybe these provide more energy return than the carbon plate. I'm not 100% sure. However, I feel like none of these shoes are overly stiff, because when that happens, you tend to get a little bit of heel slippage because the shoe won't bend with you, and you're not really benefiting from all of that midsole foam and that carbon plate. So I'm going to call it a draw when it comes to the carbon technology in both of these shoes. I'm going to throw stability into the midsole section of this video, because I think many runners worry that a shoe with almost 40mm of stack height in the heel will feel quite unstable. And where that's poorly implemented, I do think that's true. I don't think either of these shoes come across as unstable. However, I would say that Adios is slightly less stable than the Alphafly. And that might be because, I mean, it's pretty obvious, the Adios is a slightly slimmer shoe, especially on that outsole, than the Alphafly. But the Alphafly, I don't know what about it is, it just feels much more stable than the Adios Pro 2s. Maybe it's the wider landing, maybe it's the fit, maybe it's the slightly better lockdown, I'm not sure. But when it comes to stability, I'm much more comfortable flying around corners in these ones than I am in the Adios Pros. And finally, for midsole, let's talk about energy return. And this is a really hard thing to quantify. You know, there's no way of measuring how much energy these shoes are giving back to you. It's all down to feel. So this is incredibly subjective. So keep that in mind. I have to say, I don't think there's nearly as much difference in energy return between these two shoes as most people would like to think. I think you'll be more than happy for those energy return marathon racers with either of these shoes. I probably would say that the Alphafly ekes out the Adidas's just because it has a slightly softer foam. I think that really helps to give you that extra bounce. But I don't think you'd be disappointed with the Adidas. And if you like a slightly firmer and more responsive ride, I think the Adidas's are going to suit you incredibly well. But I think for most runners, they might be slightly more comfortable with a slightly lower drop, slightly wider, more stable shoe than the really racy feeling that I get in the Adios Pro 2s. So midsole, I'm going to call a draw. Depending on the type of runner you are, you might want this wider, slightly softer, slightly more bouncy shoe, or you might want the slightly racier, slightly higher drop Adidas shoe. Either one, I think you're going to be absolutely over the moon with when it comes to those midsoles. So finally, let's talk about the outsoles of this shoe. And I don't know if you can tell, but they're really similar. Both of these shoes have kind of pioneered the super shoe outsole, and so there's not that much difference in my opinion. Starting with the Alphafly, we've got a humongous amount of rubber in the forefoot covering that ZoomX foam and those exposed air pods. And then we also have a small amount of, I don't know if this is rubberized EVA or if this is simply rubber in the rear, but it's painted white on my version. So initially I thought there was no rubber in the heel. And it is almost the same thing on the Adidas's. We have a massive amount of that really nice continental rubber in the forefoot and 2 strips in the rear foot. The biggest difference is that this rubber is absolutely flat. There's no grooving. There's even some holes cut out to reduce some of the weight. However, I don't think that really affects the grip too much at all. I think the Alphaflys have got a really nice pull on the ground, but somehow the smooth rubber here doesn't seem to hamper the traction of these shoes at all. I've run in the wet in these, whereas I haven't yet in the Alphaflys, and I've had absolutely no problems. As far as running shoe outsoles go, these are probably 2 of the best on the market. The only drawback with this new super shoe outsole design is that we do get a little bit of foam wear in the heel, especially personally when I'm not paying as much attention to my strike. Both of these shoes have got a little bit of foam wear in the heel from rock strike and just from wear and tear, where we have a large amount of foam exposed in both of these shoes. However, I don't really think that's a massive deal. Whether or not you've got a little bit of foam wear right on the heel here, I don't think is going to be a massive problem. It's not like you're landing on it very regularly, especially when you're racing. It's probably just from warming up in both of these shoes before racing in them. And I don't think it's going to impact the wear or the durability of this shoe in any significant way. So when it comes to outsoles, they're identical, so it's got to be a draw. On to value now of these 2 shoes, and I don't really think you can call either of these shoes good value when compared to so many great cheaper options that are on the market at the moment. Alphaflys are £270 full priced, and the Adidas's are £180 full price. So that's a lot of money to spend on a running shoe when you can get some pretty great trainers for even around £100 nowadays. Now, obviously, if you're paying full price for these shoes, I do think the Adios Pros are a way better offer. They're around £90 cheaper than the Alphaflys, and that's a pretty significant money. That's another pair of shoes that you could get at the same time. However, we're seeing the Alphaflys discounted so regularly at the moment. For instance, I got mine at £150, which is actually cheaper than I paid for my Adios Pro 2s. That means that in the real world, these shoes are pretty much going to cost you around the same amount of money. And so, honestly, it might come down to whichever you can get cheaper and whichever you prefer. If you can get one of them cheaper, then get that one. If you really know you want a slightly higher drop, a slightly racier, slightly firmer, more responsive feel, and I mean really slightly, then the Adidas's might be right for you. If you know you want a slightly more wide, stable, softer feel with a slightly lower drop, then maybe you want to consider the Nikes. But for a lot of runners, I think this decision does come down to price, because these 2 running shoes are so close when it comes to how I really think they make you perform. I might give the overall win ever so slightly to the Nike Alphafly Next percents when compared to the Adidas Adios Pro 2s, but they are so comparable in almost every single way. I think you're going to be over the moon with whichever one of these shoes you end up getting. But let me know what you think of these shoes down in the comment section below. Have you run in both of these? If you have, which one is your preference? Am I wrong? Am I missing one massive benefit of each one of these shoes? Who knows? Let me know in the comments. If you've enjoyed this video, please consider liking it and push us through that YouTube algorithm, as it really helps the channel out. And consider subscribing for more running shoe videos, running tips and triathlon training videos. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.